Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we're going to be talking about the newest EP from Open Mike Eagle called What Happens When I Try to Relax. You know, I missed covering the last time Open Mike Eagle put out an EP, and if you know anything about the hip-hop content on this channel and how often Open Mike Eagle has made my year-end list, I don't think I'm ever going to be making that mistake again. And really, I'm not sure why I didn't review a special episode of back in 2015. It was already a pretty strong year for hip-hop. I liked the project in retrospect, I had covered him before, and I wouldn't have objected to another great project on the pile, especially considering my rules for EPs were flexible at best, even then. And yet, when you consider the other years in which I've covered him, well, 2014's Dark Comedy was only beaten back by Run the Jewels and Jason Eady, and 2017's Brick Body Kids Still Daydream was only narrowly beaten out by the Mountain Goats. And even Hella Personal Film Festival with Paul White was my favorite hip-hop album of 2016. If that is not a stirring indictment of how lyrical and potent of an MC he is, I don't know what is. But Open Mike Eagle has had a busy 2018 regardless, between podcasts, a show on Comedy Central, and a pro wrestling bout that showed him holding his own in the ring on the indie circuit. I was a little bit amazed he had time to cut and promote another project. But hey, 6 tracks on his own new label. I wasn't about to sit this one out even amidst a really strong year for hip-hop. So what do we get from What Happens When I Try to Relax? Well, this is an odd EP to talk about. And I shouldn't have to say that it's far from bad. It's actually pretty consistently great, but it's a different sort of listen than his past 3 full-length albums. But the comparison that came to mind the most, and bear with me on this, was that to Lupe Fiasco's abbreviated mixtape Lost in the Atlantic. Crazy clever in a lot of the wordplay, sure, but also an uncanny step between mainstream trends intent on taking the piss out of them to intentionally disorient both the indie and the mainstream audiences who might not exactly expect what's coming. Now, I'll definitely argue Open Mike Eagle stuck the landing far more effectively, namely because there's no label drama, he's markedly more self-aware and direct, and the thematic core feels a little bit more balanced this time around. But I can see how this might not go down as easily as some of his more critically acclaimed work. I still think it's great, but it might take a little while for some audiences to warm up to it. And here's the thing, even despite giving this a lot of listens and cluing into what Open Mike Eagle is trying to do with this, it can still feel like an uncanny listen, especially against the larger context of mainstream hip-hop and his left-field career. I'll always be a big fan of his voice and his knack for melody, but to hear him pick up a more yelping delivery and spit triplet flows like on Relatable peak Open Mike Eagle is intentionally jarring, especially against the glittery synths and the lumbering trap beat. And make no mistake, Open Mike Eagle, he knows that this will sound a little awkward or discombobulating if you know him. Hell, he's counting on it. That's the big joke of it, that it suddenly gets a lot less funny when he has that relatability to a less discerning audience, and it gets punctured by his socio-political reality. And those subversive, dark jokes, often riding on the punchline of accessible production, they can give these songs a lot of edge. Every single thing takes these misty, gothic pianos against a crushing bass beat that wouldn't feel that far removed from tones you'd hear in modern SoundCloud rap that distorts his voice ever so slightly if I'm going to note out a production glitch. It's a song about conforming to unfair stereotypes under the assumption that everything about the Black experience can be understood and recycled by an audience that has never suffered the same risks. The hook references getting 100% on a video game that can be replayed over and over again without any deeper stakes. But for Black people in America, the stakes are much higher, where like Pete Rose, the baseball player, Open Mike Eagle is forced to bet on himself and see his style driven out of the mainstream, pushed out of the scene, especially in a world where he can tell the truly dangerous from those who just don't perceive the larger reality. And he wonders if there's even much of a difference, especially when people of all races will default towards stereotypes on some level. But then that circles back to the Arca-like glossy synths and the trap rumblings of maybe gang and initiation, where Black men have had to grow comfortable with self-reflection in the modern era in the face of lingering trauma that he sees more similarities than differences with all of his kin. And while he doesn't really want to call it a gang because he knows that context, that might just be what it is, and he's got to roll with it. And here's an important thing to note. I'm not the target audience of that song. Hell, I don't think I'm the target audience of the entire project. The tangled thoughts and doubts that Open Mike Eagle tries to peel through in just a moment to breathe, and it kind of makes sense that fellow rapper Milo is referenced here because the sentiment of flourishing in the lag time is just as prevalent here, getting that moment to fully breathe and process and what he thinks about while he's doing so. But for Open Mike Eagle, it does run a little bit deeper, because he's speaking primarily to the black kids amidst a white audience. Spoke most plainly on Southside Eagle's 93 Bulls, which probably is the most familiar production with the gliding cymbals and the dark echoing beep and the misty snap recalling a bit of dark comedy, but also speaking on how, despite all of his hustle, he's still in the red. He's not quite making money yet in this capitalistic system. Now, part of this is running left of center, and boy does he know that, as his right path never really revealed itself for him, but some of this necessarily does come through an increasing disconnect between the stories told in his art and the reality of his work as a modern artist. Hell, he describes Brickbody Kids Still Daydream, his last album, as an audio mural about his aunt in Chicago to whom he doesn't even talk. And then he uses a series of loaded references to the self-flagellating 90s alternative scene consumed in self-loathing and heroin, and a lot of it was described in the art as love songs. And on some level, then he winds up feeding that scene, going to the north side of Chicago to play the Pitchfork Festival. And in that subtext is a loaded question of accountability, as he tries to speak his message to the black kids in the audience for that resonant, relatable experience. But he knows the predominantly white audience will only pick up the surface level angst and conflate the art and the artist, missing the point in the same way that so many people of that era did with grunge and alternative music. Now, there are two other songs on this EP, one that I like a great deal and the other less so. The former is Microfiche, an introspective examination of the privilege that he now does have, because some of his work, despite it being in the red, there are some things that are better. He can afford to go to the dentist and get new shirts if he puts on weight, and more tellingly, he feels a little awkward talking about the pain he does feel right now in the face of a nightmare, even as it lets him bash the NFL, hide his weed convincingly enough to not get questioned that hard by the police, and embrace a slightly more comfortable lifestyle. After all, the vampires that would leech off of fame, they're not coming for his pen or his social commentary, especially with the bubbling, muted gloss of the more defined baseline here. And yet the hook emphasizes how it can all go away so quickly if he closes his eyes. Unfortunately, we do have to talk about the one song I don't quite like as much, Single Ghost, which seems like a love song about a ghost until you realize it's an extended metaphor for someone who only seems to exist online or through social media. And it is a good song. I like how Open Mike Eagle emphasizes a certain glamour in this person's curated existence from what he sees, and his general contempt for Instagram on the next track does add some continuity to why the song was included, but I'm also not exactly a huge fan of the production. The clip beat sounds pretty brittle, the pitched down backing vocals don't really help, and the grainy contorted horn sample, I think that's what the melody is, it doesn't quite click for me. And thematically, it does feel a little bit tenuous to tie it in with the rest of the EP. The social media connection can be disruptive to one's relaxation, sure, but I'd argue a song like Check to Check on Hella Personal Film Festival went a little bit further there and ultimately stuck the landing a little more. But as a whole, yeah, I really did enjoy this, and I wanted to make sure I got this as right as possible. On Southside Eagle 93 Bulls, he did warn me to get this airtight if I was going to write about this, and I think I'm close. That said, I wouldn't put this among his best releases in his full-length catalog, if only because the greater number of tracks would give him a little bit more room to spread out and deepen some of the themes, and there are cuts here I don't think quite have the same lyrical density that I love and appreciate about some of his work, and some of the more mainstream adjacent sounding cuts, well, the production doesn't always click for me if I'm being very honest. But for me, yeah, it's a great EP, easy 8 out of 10, absolutely recommended if you're a fan, or even if you're just looking for an inroad to Open Mike Eagle with production that is certainly contemporary. He could build something of an audience off a couple of these songs. Again, I can't promise that it won't feel a little uncanny or it won't throw you for a loop, but hey, it's Open Mike Eagle, and like all of his projects, I do think it's worth it. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. This was an interesting project to talk about. I really did enjoy it. If you want to buy or stream it, links are down there below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious where you guys are going to fall on this, especially with regards to other Open Mike Eagle projects. I don't think it's his best. Like, there's a number of other albums I would go back to before this, but it's definitely worth a lot of listens. And I really did appreciate the moments and nuggets of wit that come through. And with every listen, it does continue to get better, like all of his projects. But Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support the channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote for my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. If you want to see a schedule to my Instagram, link down there below. I know you hate Instagram, Open Mike Eagle, but hey, I gotta use it as much as we both do. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.
Tell me what you like and I'll ruin it. I will show you the computer dance. Nigga, you already doing it.